Hello, I'm Locke Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where my guest is Dr. Loren Scott. He's a professor emeritus from LSU, an economist, and he's going to talk to us about the difference between socialism and capitalism, and why, in his opinion, capitalism is by far superior, because all of us decide in the whole economy what goods are made and for what price. Socialism is honestly just the opposite, very few deciding those big factors. He's also going to talk to us about his forecast, both last year and for the next upcoming year. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Dr. Loren Scott.
Hi, I'm Sean Fagan of Locke Meredith, Sean Fagan & Associates. Open the phone book or look online. There are plenty of lawyers to choose from. And if you ask any of them, they'll agree that the vast majority of claims settle without ever having gone to trial. And I'll tell you, any lawyer can settle a claim. It's not hard to settle a claim, but it takes hard work to get a client what he or she deserves. At Locke Meredith, Sean Fagan & Associates, we have a proven record of working hard for our clients. Whether you hire us at all, give us a call.
Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm very pleased to have back on the show Dr. Loren Scott. He's a professor emeritus from LSU, economics department, and he is an economist.
Hey,
Dr. Scott, it's wonderful to see you
Great to be
again.
back. Great to be back again.
And it's our annual get-together to kind of see if what you told me last year turned out. And I don't know how you could have predicted, meaning each year, and I don't know how you could have predicted so many things correctly, but you did. But when I went back and looked at it, so kind of want to dive into all these issues again.
Okay.
And I realized last time looking at the notes from last year, we kind of looked at the difference in the way the government policies affect economics. And you know, you're hearing a lot of talk now today about socialism versus capitalism versus, you know, I don't know, corporate capitalism, where you got these 4 or 5 monster companies that seem to control all the power. And so make those distinctions again for me, please, sir, for the folks.
Well, I mean, socialism is where government basically owns most of the assets and controls most of the assets and dictates this is how much is going to be produced of this is how much can be produced of this is how much people will be paid in wages, this is how many people will get to work in this particular job. They make all those decisions at a governmental level. Capitalism is this marvelous thing where there are these multi-millions of decisions that are made every day about how much people will get paid, where they will work, how many goods and services are going to get made, and what their price is going to be, how much of it's going to be produced, and nobody runs it. It's the most remarkable thing. It kind of, when I taught kids at LSU, I'd tell them it's kind of like your body. You know, you think about how the miraculous thing your body is. You're not having to sit there and say, heart, pump a little more blood to my big toe right quick.
Right.
You know, you don't have to say lungs, take another breath, heart, take another beat. There's a lot of things your body does automatically. Well, there's this the kind of miraculous thing about the capitalist system is nobody runs it.
It's like a living organism.
It really is, and the really neat thing is when it runs itself, when it operates itself, resources go to the very best place of operation. The people that are the smartest and the most productive are the ones that go to the right place and get paid the highest wages without anybody directing them. It's just kind of the good old price mechanism and the wage mechanism make sure that people that really good go where they're supposed to be. It is really kind of a miraculous thing. And
I remember you guys,
my very first class, and my very first day in every one of my classes, I would try to get across to kids, what we're going to talk about this year is something stunning that you would not believe if you weren't. Yeah, and people are around it all the time, just like you're around your body all the time, and you don't realize how miraculous it is. You're around the market system all the time, you don't realize how miraculous it is.
You guys taught me when I took economics that basically capitalism, and it's what I've lived for the last 61 years, that it ultimately results in the best product or service at the lowest possible rate.
Exactly right. There's something amazing about competition. There's something amazing about the price mechanism and about competition. If you start producing something that's really, really, really good, really, really different, and people really will like it, then they'll start asking for more of it, which means its price goes up, and somebody else can look around and say, well, I'll be dogged. People like cars. I think I'll start making cars too.
iPhone.
Yeah, or iPhones or whatever, you name it. But there's something about the price mechanism that sends out these amazing signals, and we're smart people. We look at the signals and say, well, maybe I ought to do that. You know, I've been working in this particular job, but I'm looking over here, and these people are getting paid a whole lot more wages than I am, and I can do that. No, I'm going to just go over there. I don't have to be directed to do that. I'll automatically do that. It's really kind of an amazing system.
In my brain, I'm kind of going, in my lifetime, and maybe I'm naive, but it seems to me today, more and more power is controlled by very few people. It's almost like all the big power is controlled by very few people, whether it's in the executive department, where it's the president or governor, it's designed that way. Mm-hmm. But then you have Congress, both in the House and the Senate. You have the judiciary with the Supreme Court, mm-hmm. 5 out of the 9. And in the Senate, you got your Senate Majority Leader and a few of his lieutenants, and the same thing for Speaker Pelosi, let's say, in the House, and her few leaders. And they're making the decisions for everybody, mm-hmm. instead of what you're describing, which is basically everybody has power and they exercise it, and it results in the best production.
Yeah, I think the difference is, until very recently, I think the people that were in those, we've always had a House, we've always had a Senate, we've always had a President, right. We've always had a Supreme Court. But what they did was they recognized the market and the way it worked, and they recognized there's some inequities in it, but generally speaking, it's the best darn thing around by a mile. And so that's what they promoted, and that's what they tried to take care of, especially the Supreme Court tried to take care of
right.
that particular model. And now we just have a bunch of people, for some reason, despite overwhelming evidence about what socialism does. I mean, please tell me a country, any place where this has really worked well. Please, before God, tell me that. Then I'll start listening to you.
Because you can't find one.
But you can't find one. As a matter of fact, people often talk about how much different things are in Europe and how great things are in Europe. Well, I keep telling them, said, look, here's what you'll discover if you look at Europe. There are exactly 3 countries in Europe that have a higher per capita income than Louisiana. Not the United States. Louisiana, for God's sake.
Which aren't very high.
And one of those is Norway, which has the North Sea oil and has one of the largest sovereign wealth funds in the world because of that. Surely they can take care of themselves. And then there's a little place called, about the size of East Baton Rouge Parish, called Luxembourg, okay, which has the highest per capita income almost in the world, because
everybody moves there?
well, no, what happened about 10 years ago, they used to be very poor. And then about 10 years ago, they lowered their corporate tax rates to almost nothing, and they raised their bank secrecy laws very high, and suddenly, boom, everybody's coming in like crazy. But in Germany, France, England, these people are way poorer than we are.
Well, so, you talked about, and we've talked about almost every time we get together, that when I look at, for example, President Obama, there was a huge increase in regulations, which is the government really kind of starting to take control of those particular industries that they're focused on. Under Trump, I think it was, you got to get rid of 3 for every one you decide you're going to regulate or send out a regulation. And then now we've got President Biden, who, in my view, is like President Obama on steroids. They're just like, they want to regulate everything, and they're real pro, I guess, green climate change and all, and equity versus
yeah, well, as a matter of fact,
equality.
There's a very objective measure you can look at, and that's the number of pages in the Federal Registry. If you look at the number of pages in the Federal Registry since 1960, the last 6 decades, you'll find that 6 of the 10 highest years of additions to the Federal Registry occurred during the Obama administration. As a matter of fact, the highest year ever, 2016, was his last year in office. And so basically he was surrounded by people who looked around and said, there's a lot of, capitalism creates some inequities. Not everybody's ends up with exactly the same stuff. So we need to fix that. And so there were a lot of regulations that were passed during that time period to try to deal with these inequities. And I hear people when they say that, but you also have to understand something else. When you increase regulations, you shift the cost curves of all firms in the United States upward. They end up producing less output and hiring fewer people.
All right, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith, Legal Lines. My very special guest, Dr. Loren Scott, Professor Emeritus, LSU, an economist extraordinaire. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Mitchell Meredith. At Locke Meredith, Sean Fagan & Associates, we know each case and client are unique, and that no 2 cases are the same. But one thing remains constant, and that is our passion to help our clients. After an accident, we know your life has changed. which is why we passionately fight to make you and your family whole. Remember, whether you hire us at all, give us a call at 272-5555. We're here to serve you.
I'm lawyer Locke Meredith. If you're battling an insurance company because of a wreck not your fault and they're not calling you back or being fair, whether you hire us at all, give us a call, 272-5555, or email Locke Meredith, Sean Fagan and Associates. You have nothing to lose. Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, very pleased to have back on the show Dr. Loren Scott. He's a professor emeritus, LSU. Let's dive back in. So we kind of talked about the difference between socialism and capitalism.
Mm-hmm.
And my question, and in your view, and you've been doing this your whole adult life, capitalism is by far superior,
mm-hmm.
and where it may have some inequities,
mm-hmm.
unfairness,
mm-hmm.
then you properly tweak that
mm-hmm.
with policies and regulation and laws. But you believe now that is excessive. It particularly was excessive with Obama, and it looks like we're headed back that direction after President Trump. Tell me the factors that you look at to try and figure out where we are and where we're going.
Well, at the national level, there's kind of two key things that I've been looking at. Our forecasts are based on the national economy having a very good year this year. We're having a great year this year. Real gross domestic product growing about 6.6%. Now, by way of reference, really good year from the past, 3.5%, 6.6%. Now, part of the reason for that is we were coming out of a remarkably deep decline last year, the worst decline by a factor of 3 that this country's ever experienced on a quarterly basis, really, really bad. And so it's been coming back from that. The other thing that's caused it to come back so fast is the enormous amount of money pumped into people's pocketbooks over the last
By the federal government.
By the federal government. Those federal stimulus checks, there was 2 of them. And if you look at a picture of personal income in the United States, it's kind of growing like this. You hit a little bit of a dip due to COVID, and then suddenly, you're talking about up here stuff, really big increases. And as a result, people going out and spending that, and of course, real gross domestic product is made up of spending. The total amount of spending takes place in the economy, and 2/3 of that pie is made up of personal consumption spending. Well, people had tons of money. Now,
that they didn't necessarily earn.
And this is money that stimulus money is going to run out. It's kind of interesting, by the way, to see where some of it was spent. Because if you look, I don't care if you look at Shreveport, if you look at Lake Charles, you look at New Orleans, you look at Baton Rouge, what you'll discover is in the first half of 2021, gross revenues at our casinos reached record levels. So we know we're at least
says a lot, doesn't it?
Even in Shreveport, which actually had a casino shut down because of COVID, even with only 5 versus 6, they still set record levels of money coming in. So that's one of the places that it went. But it just went for general spending. Of course, one of the reasons the housing market is so hot right now is that people have that money in their pocketbooks. But what's going to happen, of course, pretty soon we're going to run out of that stimulus stuff. But the other thing that's going to happen, I really think once we get into the second half of 23, and especially second half of 22,
next year,
and all of 23, I think you're going to see quite a bit of a slowdown because you're going to get more regulations, and we've already talked about that.
Right.
But the second thing is the only way you can finance these things, like the infrastructure bill or the others, is to raise taxes. And there's been a great deal of discussion about raising taxes. And whatever you think about that, whether it's fair, not fair, whatever, increase taxes, you shift firms' cost curves upward, they end up producing less output and hiring fewer people. That's just Econ 101. And so as a result, my forecasts are based on 2023, is it 2022 second half, and then 2023 only growing about 2.2%, more like Europe. When you have European policies, you get European growth rate.
Do you expect stagflation like we had in the Carter days? First define that, I guess.
So first of all, on the inflation side, the inflation side is, I think right now, largely because of supply chain issues. We have remarkable supply chain issues right now. I just got through going to a paint store, buying a can of paint. I not only paid for the can of paint, but I actually paid a supply chain service charge, by the way. So we all know that there is a problem out there right now. We have ships stacked up, trying to get in Los Angeles for a lot of reasons. some of them very goofy progressive reasons, not allowed to use non-union truck drivers.
Really?
You know, it's some things like that. But the supply chain thing is at least right now causing a temporary, hopefully a temporary spike in inflation. So you're seeing, if you're a Social Security recipient, you're going to get a 6.9% COLA. Excuse me, a 5.9% COLA.
Cost of living adjustment.
Cost of living adjustment coming because of what's happening to inflation. I'm hopeful, and most of the forecast I've seen is that inflation is going to drop back down once we get the supply chain issues worked out.
When, do we know?
Well, I mean, I think most of the bigger models, way bigger than mine, are saying in the second half of 2022, second half of next year, we'll finally get all this sort of worked out, and we'll get some of these things fixed. COVID is dropping off all over the world, and so people are able to go back to work. So that's going to help a lot. And you know, I just think once that happens, many of your supply chain issues are going to go away.
So I think I read this week, number one, that the 6% hopefully increase or GDP is not going to hit that level. And tell me if I'm wrong. And then the other thing is inflation is another reason inflation might go up, because if they pass this 3.5 trillion and what are we at, like 10 trillion or 9.5 trillion? And the Fed is just printing all this money.
If you do pass the infrastructure bill, and if you do pass, especially if you pass the $3.5 trillion other America Best, whatever it's called, you're going to end up with a situation economists refer to as too much money chasing too few goods and services. And that's where you get inflation. So I really think if those pieces of legislation passed, I think you're building in, well, there's two things that are going on. A, you're spending a lot more money, and B, part of that 3.5 trillion has got a lot of disincentives to work in it, okay? And there are a lot of disincentives to work. What's going to happen is the few people who are willing to work are going to have to be paid a whole lot more, which also a lot of that's going to be passed on.
Increased prices.
There's a remarkable statement made by the the president's press secretary, who said, "We just believe it's immoral for people who are taxed to actually pass that price along to people at higher prices."
I don't think she's a capitalist.
I don't think she's a capitalist.
So possibly the inflation may drop, but it's possible that it will stay at, because didn't it increase like 5%, the highest in the last quarter
almost
in history, right?
Almost 6%. It's because it had been, drifting along at 1.5 and 2, maybe 2.5%. Very, very manageable inflation rates. But this is not what you want to see.
Right.
You don't want to see inflation at these levels, because it starts distorting where people invest. They don't end up investing in the ideal situation. It screws up the market from that standpoint, and so it's just not good. But hopefully the Fed will see the light. Right now, the Fed is pursuing what we call a very easy money policy. They're trying to get the economy going again.
And this has been going on for 10
it all the
years,
way back.
right?
Huh?
Hadn't this been going on for 10 years?
They've been pursuing a fairly easy monetary policy for some time, i.e. that's why interest rates have been so low. And now that's also why the stock market has gone up so much, right? Because people aren't putting their money in CDs because there's no money there. So where am I going to put it? I put it in the stock market, even though it's not warranted there.
All right, well, we'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. Dr. Loren Scott, Professor Emeritus from LSU. Be right back, folks.
I'm lawyer Collins Locke Meredith. Among the most important factors to consider when you're hiring an injury attorney is trust. You trust your attorney will put your interest first, treat you with respect, fairness, and honesty. You trust them to be there for you when you need them. At Locke Meredith, Sean Fagan and Associates, thousands of clients have trusted us to represent them, and for good reasons. Please visit us at LockeMeredith.com to learn more, and whether you hire us at all, give us a call at 272-5555. You have nothing to lose.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. Again, pleased to have back on the show Dr. Loren Scott, LSU Professor Emeritus, Economics. Let's dive back in. So we talk about inflation, prices. Let's shift gears a little bit, because you mentioned the 3.5 trillion package that the Democrats are trying to pass. And it has some stuff in it based on conversations we've had that you're kind of worried about if it passed. One of them being this kind of green stuff.
Well, there's the green stuff. There's the disincentives to work stuff. I mean, I think if you end up giving somebody $3,600 a child, you just give them that money. I think after a while you're making enough money where you don't. What's the point?
Kind of what
Why
we
go to work at a crummy job, which is the only thing they may be eligible
It's
for?
kind of what we just endured for the last 6 months or so,
Yeah,
right? I mean, where they sent out all this stimulus
you get all this
checks.
money coming into the feds, and it has the whole thing about incentives. That's the other thing I try to get across to kids in my class, is when you're thinking about different policy changes, always look at what incentives you're creating, you know? And sometimes when you create disincentives to work, you do not want to see what's going to happen on the other side of that. That's never a very good thing. Now, the green stuff is worrisome. Now, this is going to cause a lot of people to turn the TV off. but I'm going to tell you, I mean, there's a great book out there now called Unsettled by a guy named Stephen Koonin. And he was actually in the Obama administration in the Department of Energy. And he's an astrophysicist. He's was a chancellor of Caltech, very, very bright.
Smart guy.
Great book. And what the book says is, well, look, yeah, there's some impact of climate change on the economy, but it's nothing like for example, I do a little parlor game with people. I ask people, since 1900, how much has the sea level risen since 1900? 1900, I mean, that's 121 years ago. How much, take a wild guess, how much the sea level has risen? That's okay. What do you think?
It hadn't, maybe it went down?
No, it's risen, a full 8 inches. The distance from my thumb to the tip of my finger, 7/100 of an inch a year. Now,
and how are we supposed to control that?
National Geographic put on the front, this is National Geographic, put on the front page of their, I think it was a September 20 issue or 29, maybe it's 2019 issue, a picture of the Statue of Liberty with water up to her waist. Tell people, you need to be frightened about. Well, that would take, at present rates, that would take about 20,000 years for that to happen. I believe even we could adjust to that, But I mean, if you look at other things like the hurricanes, if you look from 1972 to the present time period, look at the number of hurricanes that have hit the world, and tropical, cyclones on the other side. I mean, it is a straight line like this. It's not a line going like this at all. And now you say, why did you start in 1972? Because that's when we first had satellites to actually measure them.
Interesting.
Before that, you had to use your eyesight to do it. If you look at tornadoes, same thing. Okay. Now here's the trick. By the way, it's interesting. If you look at wildfires, in the United States, the story of wildfires depends on where you start. If you start in 1983, looking forward at wildfires, you see a slight upward increase. If you start in 1923, you start up here and it comes down like a rock, and then it tells you a totally different story.
Interesting.
Depending on where you start. And that's why I keep telling people, when you see data that presented to you that things are getting a lot worse, look at what the starting point is. Okay. If you start looking at temperature and you start in 1975, that tells you one story. If you start in 2,000 years before Christ was born, it's a totally different story. You learn that the temperatures we're experiencing now are nothing compared to what they experienced during the Bronze Age or some of the other time periods. So
So regardless of whether, it's a legitimate concern or not, what about the fact that so much money is potentially being spent and so much energy and effort being spent on addressing something that doesn't really seem to be productive in any way from an economic standpoint?
Well, I mean,
is that the case?
Yeah, I think that's the case. I think it's very bad. And again, people need to watch incentives. Because, if you start going down this road to, say, getting off of fossil fuels, for example, take a good hard look at what's going on in Europe right now.
Yeah.
The wind quit blowing in the North Sea.
Texas just went through this.
I know, for the go, but the wind quit blowing in the North Sea. They really rely on wind over in Europe. So the wind quit blowing in the North Sea. And suddenly they said, oh, hell, we've got to have electricity. We need to go to natural gas. Well, they don't have their own natural gas. They have to beg Mr. Putin, the strong man. And he said, okay, I will give you some natural gas.
Give me a pipeline.
If you give me something else. And then they say, well, okay, we'll use oil. One of the reasons the price of oil is as high as it is now is the Europeans are having to use oil to generate electricity over there. The price of natural gas, which may be $5 per million BTU here, is $35 per million BTU in Europe. And so they're getting ready to go into a very bad winter. I don't know what they're going to do this winter about staying warm. So there's just all kinds.
So that
of
makes no
screwy
sense from
makes
a
no
way
sense.
to energize your country.
It
And in
makes
fact-
sense. It makes sense if you buy into the idea that fossil fuels is destroying the earth.
Well, that's
if you
where I was
believe
headed.
AOC, and AOC says we've only got 7 years left. You know, we're believing the bartender instead of listening to astrophysicists who actually look at this. As a matter of fact, it's kind of interesting. If you look at the actual report put out by the UN, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and look at what those people say versus the interpretation, the spin the UN puts on it, and then the non-governmental organizations like Sierra Club and others, Bucket Brigade and others put on it then, and then you give it, I'm sorry, to journalists, and then they put another spin because they're trying to sell newspapers and stuff. How do you do that? By alarming the hell out of people.
Sensationalism.
I just think, and then the other thing, as an economist, that we really understand, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry now. This is a multi-billion-dollar industry. So there's a lot of money, and there's a lot of money riding on making people afraid.
So let's shift to Louisiana, right?
Okay.
In Trump days, energy independent, our oil companies in Louisiana, our gas companies in Louisiana were doing well, our employees were doing well, businesses were doing well. They've now reduced the ability for our oil and gas producers to produce, right?
Well, I mean, they've done some. First of all, you've
Taking
got
land off.
Yeah. First of all, you've got who he appointed to be the head of the Department of Interior. This lady Deb Haaland, who is AOC on steroids. She's bought totally into the green stuff. She's against fracking. She's against the internal combustion engine. She's remarkably enough, she's from New Mexico, and she's just bad. And so the first thing they did was to say no more lease sales to the Gulf of Mexico. Until a judge in Monroe, Louisiana, pointed out to them, you don't get to decide that. That's something Congress decides, not the executive branch. So now we're going to at least have a lease sale in November. But in the meantime, they're doing a study. They're doing a study of the impact of drilling in the Gulf of Mexico on the climate in the world. Take a wild guess at how that's going to turn out.
Pretty much have
But,
that.
and so you look now at the Gulf, you have maybe 12 rigs operating. Used to be 35 or so, at one point 60.
So give me a forecast for Louisiana and our cities.
Well, Louisiana, we think Louisiana will pick up about 110,000 jobs over the next 2 years. What you don't want to do is you don't want to be above I-10. If you're above I-10, most of those cities are not doing very well. Baton Rouge is probably the best place in the state to be right now. There's a lot of industrial construction on the way that's coming along. We've got the Amazon facility out at Cortana Mall. It's going to create a lot of jobs. It's looking really good.
Fantastic. Right now. Dr. Scott, it's
Pleasure,
been wonderful to have you back. Look forward to seeing you again. This is Locke Meredith with Legal Lines. Dr. Loren Scott, Professor Emeritus, LSU. Thank you for being with us.